Today, we're going to be talking about the executive department of Texas. Specifically, we're talking about like the governor's office and pretty much all of the entities that make up the governor's side of the house. Well, a couple of important things to kind of keep in mind is the requirements to be governor of the state of Texas is you have to be at least 30 years old, you have to be a citizen of the United States, and you have to be a resident of Texas for at least 5 years. The salary is $150,000, at least it is as of right now. And there's a number of ways of getting rid of a governor, but the most specific, well, besides voting them out, but the most specific and significant one is probably impeachment. So what impeachment is basically the same thing that you have for the federal system, whereas in the federal system, you have the House of Representatives puts forth articles of impeachment, which then get sent to the Senate, and then the Senate decides based on 2/3 of the Senate whether or not that person should be impeached and removed from office. Same exact thing with the state government, whereas the House, which is the state House, puts forth articles of impeachment, and then it gets sent to the state Senate. So kind of the same thing, but just on the state level. And then again, with a 2/3 majority, the governor can be removed from office. There's two ways to actually to remove a governor. The first way, like I just mentioned, is impeachment. Well, actually, there's a third way. Obviously, you can vote them out, but I mean, while they're in office. And the second way is called recall. Now, Texas doesn't actually use the process of recall, so you can't get rid of a governor that way. But other states do. Like a good example is California. Gray Davis was the governor of California and got recalled. And basically, that's kind of how we had Arnold Schwarzenegger as the governor of California. So kind of keep in mind those kinds of things matter on kind of how you get rid of or how you remove a governor from office. The governor in Texas actually works under what's called a plural executive system, which is basically a system in which the executive powers divided among the several elected officials. And so we'll kind of talk about some of those different officials in Texas that make a difference. There's two ways of getting your main officials for the state of Texas. One is either by elected, and the other one is actually by being appointed, and most positions are appointed by the governor. So let's start talking about the elected officials first. We have the governor, obviously, is an elected position. Then you have the lieutenant governor. Now, I'm not going to get into the names of the individual people who actually have these positions right now, because those tend to change with each election as we go forward. You should know who they are because that's kind of important. But like I said, I'm not really holding you to the actual names of the people. We're much more concerned with the positions themselves and what those positions encompass. So I mentioned you've got the governor, you've got the lieutenant governor, and the lieutenant governor basically serves as like the person who takes over the system if the governor ever has to actually leave. And as I mentioned previously before, when we were talking about the legislative side of the House, the Attorney General actually resides as the leader of the Senate for the state, kind of like our Vice President does for the Senate of the United States. So other positions that are important. Sorry, my throat keeps going out on every one of these lessons. Trying to drink tea to hopefully, stop that from happening. Okay, so other very important positions within the state of Texas is the Attorney General. The Attorney General kind of brings all the legislation that basically defends the state. Can be against other individuals within the state. It can be against other government entities. It can be against the federal government. So the Attorney General does have a lot of power and a lot of sway, and keep in mind it's important to follow kind of what's going on with the Attorney General. Quite in a number of cases, an Attorney General often ends up becoming your governor. As a matter of fact, the Governor Abbott was originally the Attorney General for the state of Texas and then became governor after an election, of course. A couple other positions that are important is we have the Commissioner of the General Land Office. This is a person that has the oversight of state-owned lands and coastal lands. We have the Commissioner of Agriculture, which just from the name, you can kind of get an idea of what they do. The Texas Railroad Commission, which is really important if you kind of think about it, because a lot of people don't actually know that the Texas Railroad Commission even exists or what they actually do. A lot of the power grid that takes place within Texas, the people who make the decisions for that come under the Texas Railroad Commission. Because a long time ago, basically, when the Texas Railroad Commission was created, it was to basically respond to the land barons that were controlling the railroads, or the railroad barons, if you want to call them that. And so what happened was they needed to, as the public utilities started needing oversight, they realized they needed people to actually serve in those positions. And so rather than creating brand new entities to do this, like a Public Utilities Commission Association or something, what they did is they gave all the power to the Texas Railroad Commission because it was already there. And so where originally they were just handling railroads, now they're handling oil, gas, and pretty much everything else within the state, which has made them a very, very powerful entity. They are also elected. And then the other one that's really important is the State Board of Education. Now, I shouldn't probably have to explain what a Board of Education actually does, considering we're all in education at this particular time. Okay, let's talk about some of the important positions that are actually appointed rather than actually elected. There's the Secretary of State. This is the chief election official. So every time we have an election, they're the ones that actually do the coordination behind the scenes. They're also the keeper of state records. There's the Commissioner of Health and Human Services. There's the Office of State-Federal Relations. So quite often there's a lot of issues that take place that involve federal oversight or federal touching any part of the state. Well, that's what the Office of State-Federal Relations actually handles. Then there's also the Adjutant General of the National Guard. Every now and then the governor has to call in the National Guard, which is usually for cases of natural disaster or civil unrest. Well, this is the individual that actually oversees that under the governor's sway. And then there's also boards and commissions that the governor appoints as well. Remember, these are all positions that the governor appoints. Part of the problem, or not, I keep saying part of the problem, part of the situation that's important to keep in mind is the governor can appoint all of these people, but getting rid of them is very hard, because once they're put into office, getting them out of office is not the easiest thing in the world to do. To give you an example, if a previous governor appointed somebody to a particular commission, the current governor cannot get rid of that person. And so the only way to get rid of that particular, to get rid of a person that's actually in one of these appointed positions, is the Senate needs a 2/3 majority to remove that person. And if the governor wants to remove that person, he or she has to be the one that actually appointed that person, and then needs the 2/3 majority from the Senate in order to remove that individual. So once somebody's in, they're pretty much in until they're either done or they quit, or they get impeached or something to that effect. And not, like I said before, not too many impeachments actually take place. Let's talk about the tenure of the governor. So the governor's office is actually a 4-year position within the state of Texas. Now, all sorts of other states have all sorts of other tenures that they have for their governors. Some have 2 years, some have 6 years. But for the state of Texas, it's a 4-year term. And keep in mind, unlike a lot of other states, there are no term limits for Texas. So that means somebody could keep serving over and over. We've had a few that have served for 2 terms, not much more than that. There is a lot of turnover within that particular position. There was Governor Bush at some point was actually in his 2nd term, and it looked like he was going to, be one of the first ones in a while to actually fulfill a 2nd term, and then he ran for president and won, and so had to pretty much turn over the position to the next person in line. So let's talk about the powers of the governor. The governor has a number of very specific powers, such as vetoing pretty much anything that kind of comes across his or her desk. And the other thing is pardons. So like the president of the United States can pardon pretty much anyone. A governor can pardon anyone within the state, as long as it's a state conviction. A federal conviction, they cannot actually overturn, or cannot pardon. And the last thing I really want to talk about is what's called the Sunset Review. The Sunset Review is something that the state came along with because they realized that every now and then we need to look at state agencies that have been running for a while, that because what happens is with a state can have can have a state agency that's been running for a while, but it's pretty much on its own and has no or very little oversight, and it's very hard to rein them back in. So what the Sunset Review does is Congress basically looks every 12 years at the state agencies that exist to see if there's anything that needs to be changed, to see if they need to remove some of those positions or some of those agencies themselves because they no longer have a purpose. And so it's a really important function, and it falls within the purview of making sure that the government is continuing to run properly without, running on endless power without any ability to rein it back in. So that's the basics of what our executive department is with our state government. Like I said, I'm not going to hold you to the names of the people who are actually in charge. It is really important to know them. I may ask you who they actually are at any specific time. So you should probably know who they are. But like I said, for this lecture, it doesn't really help for me to name a name, because if this lecture is still being used, 4 years later, it could be completely different names. So know who these actual names are. Not hard to find. And you should be good. That's all I have for today.